The Vishari Empire had ruled the stars for 12,000 years. In all that time, no species had ever successfully challenged their power. They controlled 900 star systems, commanded fleets that could darken the skies of entire worlds, and held billions of beings in chains across the galaxy. The Vishari themselves were tall creatures, standing nearly 3 meters high. Their skin was the color of dark copper, and they could see in spectrums that other species could not imagine. They lived for centuries, and their memories were long. They remembered every insult, every act of resistance, every species that had dared to stand against them. They also remembered how they had crushed each and every one. The empire operated on a simple philosophy. The strong ruled, the weak served. This was the natural order of things, and the Vishari had proven themselves the strongest beings in the known galaxy. Other species existed only to serve their needs. Some were used for labor. Some were used for entertainment. Some were simply eliminated because they occupied space the Vishari wanted. High Executor Kethvaro sat in his command chair aboard the Imperial Dreadnought Eternal Flame. He was old even by Vishari standards. Having lived for nearly 400 years, he had personally overseen the subjugation of 17 species and the complete extinction of 3 others. His record of service to the Empire was flawless. Today, he was being sent to deal with a minor species on the edge of known space, a species called humans. The Vishari had first detected human radio signals about 2 centuries ago. They had monitored the species from afar, watching them crawl across the surface of their single world, fighting petty wars and building primitive machines. The xenanthropologists had classified them as pre-ascended labor stock, which meant they were too primitive to be worth immediate attention but might prove useful as workers once they developed a bit further. That time had now come. Human technology had advanced to the point where they were beginning to spread beyond their home world. They had established small colonies on other planets in their star system and were sending probes to nearby stars. According to Imperial protocol, this meant they needed to be contacted and brought into the Empire before they could spread too far. Kethvaro found the assignment beneath his dignity. He had conquered civilizations that spanned dozens of star systems. Now he was being sent to intimidate a species that had barely left its birth world. But the High Council had insisted. There had been something in the preliminary reports that concerned them, though Kethvaro could not imagine what. The eternal flame dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the human star system. Kethvaro studied the display screens with his 4 eyes, taking in the primitive state of human development. Their space stations were small and fragile. Their ships were slow and poorly armed. Their defenses were laughable. "Open communications," he commanded. "Standard first contact protocol." The communications officer nodded and sent out the standard Imperial greeting. It was a simple message, translated into every known language and broadcast on every frequency. It informed the target species that they were now subjects of the Vishari Empire and that representatives would be arriving shortly to discuss the terms of their submission. The response came faster than Kethvaro had expected. A human face appeared on his display screen. It belonged to a female with dark hair and dark eyes. She wore a simple uniform with no decoration or rank insignia that Kethvaro could identify. "This is Ambassador Cheney of the United Earth Government," the human said. "We have received your message. We respectfully decline your offer." Kethvaro stared at the screen for a long moment. In his 400 years of life, he had never received such a response. Species begged. Species negotiated. Species submitted. They did not simply decline. "I do not think you understand your situation," Kethvaro said slowly. "The Vishari Empire has conquered 900 star systems. We command fleets that could reduce your world to ash. You do not have the option to decline." The human woman nodded as if she had expected this response. "We understand our situation very well, High Executor. We have studied your empire for some time now. We know what you do to the species you conquer. We know about the slave camps on Keth Prime. We know about the mass graves on Bashar 7. We know about the breeding farms where you raise sentient beings like livestock." Kethvaro felt a chill run through his body. This information was not supposed to be known outside the Empire. The slave camps and breeding farms were state secrets. hidden even from most Vishari citizens. "How do you know these things?" he demanded. "We listen," the human said simply. "We have been listening for a very long time." "It does not matter what you know," Kethvaro said, recovering his composure. "Knowledge cannot protect you from our fleets. You have one standard rotation to reconsider your position. If you do not submit by then, we will begin the bombardment of your population centers." The human woman was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was calm, but it carried a weight that Kethvaro could not explain. "I want you to understand something. We are not refusing out of pride or foolishness. We are refusing because we cannot allow ourselves to become part of what you have built. We have our own history of empires, conquest, slavery, and genocide. We know where that path leads. We will not walk it again." "Your history is irrelevant," Kethvaro snapped. "You will submit or you will die. Those are your only options." "No," the human said. "Those are not our only options. What other option could you possibly have? You have no fleet. You have no allies. You are alone in the universe." The human smiled slightly. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who knew something others did not. "We are patient," she said. "We are very, very patient. And we remember everything." The transmission ended. Kethvaro sat in his command chair, troubled in a way he could not explain. He had threatened thousands of species over his long career. He had seen fear, defiance, desperation, and despair. But he had never seen what he had just witnessed in that human's eyes. That was not fear. It was not desperation. It was something else entirely. It was the look of someone playing a game their opponent did not even know existed. He shook off the feeling. It did not matter what the humans believed. In one standard rotation, he would begin the bombardment. In 3 rotations, their cities would be rubble. In 10 rotations, the survivors would be on their knees, begging to serve the Empire like every other species before them. The rotation passed. Kethvaro gave the order to begin the bombardment. Nothing happened. He gave the order again. Still nothing. The weapon systems showed as online and fully functional, but they would not fire. The targeting computers would not lock onto the planet below. "What is happening?" Kethvaro demanded. His weapons officer looked up, confusion and fear in his eyes. "I do not know, High Executor. The systems appear to be working, but they will not respond to commands. It is as if something has locked us out." Kethvaro felt the chill return, colder than before. He looked at the display screen showing the blue-green planet below. It sat there peacefully, utterly unconcerned by the massive warship hanging above it. "Send a message to Fleet Command," he ordered. "Tell them we require technical assistance." "I cannot, High Executor." Communications are not responding either. For the first time in his long life, Kethvaro felt something he had never experienced before. He felt helpless. A new transmission appeared on his screen. It was the same human woman, Ambassador Cheney. "High Executor," she said. "We told you that we listen. We have been listening to your communications for quite some time. We have learned a great deal about your technology, enough to know its weaknesses." "This is impossible," Kethvaro said. "Our encryption is unbreakable." "Nothing is unbreakable," the human replied. "It just takes time. And we have had plenty of time. What do you want? Name your terms." The human shook her head. "We do not want anything from you, High Executor. We simply want you to leave. Go back to your empire. Tell your High Council what happened here. Tell them that humanity will not submit. Tell them that we are not their enemies, unless they choose to make us so. But also tell them this. We remember everything." "What does that mean?" Kethvaro demanded. "Why do you keep saying that?" "It means exactly what it says. We remember. We remember every species you have conquered. We remember every life you have taken. We remember every atrocity you have committed. And one day, when the time is right, we will remind you of all of it." The transmission ended. A moment later, Kethvaro felt control of his ship return. The weapon systems came back online. Communications were restored. He could have given the order to fire. His weapons were functional now. He could have reduced every human city to ash and proven that the Vishari Empire was still the supreme power in the galaxy. But he did not. Something held him back. It was not fear exactly. It was caution. The humans had demonstrated capabilities that should have been impossible. They had taken control of a Vishari dreadnought without firing a single shot. What else could they do? Kethvaro made a decision he would question for the rest of his life. He ordered the Eternal Flame to withdraw. He returned to Vishari space and reported to the High Council. He told them everything that had happened, sparing no details. He expected to be punished for his failure, perhaps even executed. Instead, the High Council listened in silence. When he finished, the eldest member of the council, a Vishari who had lived for nearly 1,000 years, spoke. "We have heard similar reports before," the elder said. "Scout ships that experience system failures when approaching Earth. Probes that stopped transmitting for no apparent reason. We dismissed these incidents as technical malfunctions. Perhaps we were wrong. What should we do?" Another council member asked. "Should we send a larger fleet? The humans cannot possibly defend against a full Imperial armada." The elder considered this for a long moment. "No," he finally said. "We will wait. The humans are clearly more advanced than we believed, but they are still contained within a single star system. They pose no immediate threat to the Empire. We will quarantine their space and observe them. In time, we will learn their secrets, and then we will crush them." Kethvaro nodded, but he was not convinced. He had looked into the eyes of that human ambassador. He had heard her words. "We remember everything." He did not know what that meant, but he knew it was a promise, and he suspected that one day, the Vishari Empire would learn exactly what the humans had been remembering. The years passed. Earth remained quarantined, a small bubble of space at the edge of the Empire's territory that no Vishari ship was permitted to enter. The humans made no attempt to expand beyond their star system. They sent no ambassadors, made no threats. They simply existed quietly, peacefully, as if they were content to remain on their single world forever. The High Council eventually forgot about them. There were other matters to attend to, rebellions to crush, resources to extract, species to subjugate. The Empire continued its eternal work of conquest and control, and the strange little species called humanity faded from its thoughts. But Kethvaro never forgot. In his private moments, he would pull up the recording of his conversation with Ambassador Chunwei and watch it again. He would study her face, trying to understand what she had meant. "We are patient. We are very, very patient. And we remember everything." Kethvaro died of old age 30 years after his encounter with the humans. He died with those words still echoing in his mind, certain that he had witnessed the beginning of something he did not understand. He was right. The humans were patient. They had learned patience through thousands of years of their own history, through wars, plagues, and disasters that had nearly destroyed them many times. They had learned that sometimes the best response to a threat was not to fight immediately, but to wait, to watch, to prepare. And they were preparing. Across human space, factories were being built in the dark places between stars where no one ever looked. Ships were being constructed using designs human scientists had developed by studying Vishari technology from afar. Agents were being trained to infiltrate the Empire, to look like dozens of different species, to speak hundreds of different languages. The humans were not building an army to conquer the Vishari Empire. They were building something far more dangerous. They were building a memory, a complete record of every crime the Empire had ever committed, every species it had enslaved, every life it had taken. And when that memory was complete, they would share it with the galaxy. The Vishari had ruled through fear and forgetting. They had counted on their victims being too broken, too scattered, too afraid to remember what had been done to them. They had counted on the galaxy forgetting the atrocities that built their empire. The humans would make sure that no one ever forgot. "We remember everything." It was not a threat. It was a promise. And the humans always kept their promises. In the quiet of space, far from the watchful eyes of the Vishari Empire, humanity waited, prepared, and remembered. One day, when the time was right, they would remind the galaxy of what the Vishari had done. And on that day, the Empire would discover that there were worse things than fleets and weapons. There was justice, and it was coming. 60 years had passed since High Executor Kethvero returned from Earth with his strange tale of humans who could control Vishari technology without lifting a finger. In that time, the Empire had continued its work of conquest and control. New species had been discovered and subjugated. New worlds had been stripped of their resources. New generations of slaves had been born in chains, knowing nothing of freedom. The quarantine around Earth remained in place, but no one paid it much attention anymore. The humans had never tried to break out. They had never sent ships beyond their small bubble of space. They had become a curiosity, a footnote in imperial history, nothing more. But something strange was happening in the Empire. Something no one could explain. On the forge world of Keth Prime, where billions of slaves worked day and night to produce weapons for the imperial fleets, production had been falling for years. The overseers blamed the workers and increased their punishments. They worked the slaves harder, fed them less, executed those who fell behind as examples for the others. But the production continued to fall. The problem was the machines. Critical components kept failing at the worst possible moments. Assembly lines would stop working for no reason. Computer systems would crash, losing days of data. Imperial engineers examined every machine, ran every diagnostic, replaced every suspicious component. They found nothing wrong. The machines simply did not work as well as they used to. The forge master of Keth Prime, a Vishari named Hitos, sent report after report to the High Council. He begged for new equipment, new engineers, anything that might solve the problem. The council sent what they could, but it made no difference. Production continued to decline. What Hitos did not know, what no one in the Empire knew, was that a small device had been planted in the main control center of Keth Prime 15 years earlier. The device was no larger than a grain of sand, invisible to any scanner the Vishari possessed. It had been placed there by a human agent who had spent 3 years working as a cleaning slave, waiting for the perfect moment. The device did not destroy or disable anything. It simply introduced tiny errors into the machines it connected with. A decimal point shifted slightly, a timing sequence delayed by a fraction of a second, a temperature reading just a little bit off. Each error was so small that it could not be detected, but together they added up to massive inefficiency. Keth Prime was not the only world experiencing such problems. On the pleasure moons of the Vishari High Caste, where the wealthy and powerful came to escape the burdens of ruling an empire, there had been a series of embarrassing incidents. Private communications between high-ranking officials had somehow leaked onto public networks. These messages revealed corruption, cruelty, and crimes that even the Vishari public found shocking. One high executor was exposed for stealing funds meant for military supplies and spending them on personal luxuries. Another was revealed to have ordered the execution of an entire colony simply because he found their religious practices annoying. A third was discovered to have sold military secrets to a rival faction within the imperial government. Each revelation sparked outrage. Each scandal led to public tribunals and executions. The High Council tried to contain the damage, but the leaks kept coming. They hired the best security experts in the Empire, but no one could figure out how the information was getting out. The answer was simple, though the Vishari would never discover it. Human agents had spent decades infiltrating every level of imperial society. They worked as servants, technicians, translators, entertainers. They were patient and careful, never revealing themselves, never acting in ways that might draw suspicion. They simply watched, listened, and recorded everything. And when the time was right, they leaked the information in ways that could not be traced. An anonymous message here, a file accidentally left on a public terminal here, a message quietly leaked there. Each act carefully designed to create maximum disruption while revealing nothing about its source. The Empire was slowly tearing itself apart from within, and it did not even know why. Meanwhile, on the outer edges of imperial space, something else was happening. Something the Vishari did not even have words for. Ships were appearing where no ship should be. The first reports came from cargo haulers traveling through the empty space between star systems. They spoke of shadows on their sensors, brief glimpses of vessels that appeared for only a moment before vanishing. The haulers were dismissed as unreliable witnesses. Space travel was lonely and monotonous, and people sometimes saw things that were not there. But the reports continued. A military patrol encountered a ship that did not match any known design. A mining operation detected energy signatures that vanished before they could be analyzed. A colony world reported lights in the sky that moved in ways no Vishari ship could replicate. The intelligence ministry began to take the reports seriously. Investigators were sent to interview witnesses and analyze sensor data. They found nothing concrete, but they did notice a pattern. The strange ships always appeared in regions populated by non-Vishari beings. Slave worlds, refugee camps, the scattered remnants of conquered species. And there was something else. People were disappearing. Not many, never enough to draw the attention of the imperial bureaucracy, which tracked its subjects in the millions. But here and there, individuals would vanish without a trace. A family of Kalori refugees would be present one day and gone the next. A group of vent workers would enter a tunnel and never return. A Msari elder scheduled for execution would somehow slip away from a secured detention center. The disappearances were always explained away as escapes, deaths, or clerical errors. But among local resistance groups, whispers began to spread about something they called the Quiet Ones. Miraveth was a young Kalori female who had been born into slavery. Her people had been conquered by the Vishari 300 years ago, and in that time they had lost nearly everything: their culture, their history, their hope. Miraveth had grown up in a labor camp, working 16-hour shifts in a chemical processing plant that slowly poisoned everyone who entered it. She had accepted that she would die young like everyone else she knew. She had accepted that there was no escape, no hope, no future. She had accepted that the universe was cruel, that the strong crushed the weak, and that nothing would ever change. Then one night, a stranger appeared in her dormitory. The stranger looked Kalori, but something about her was different. She moved with a confidence no slave could afford to show. She spoke with an accent Miraveth could not place. And she asked questions no Kalori had dared to ask in 300 years. What do you remember about your people's history? Do you know the songs your ancestors sang? Do you know the stories they told their children? Miraveth did not know. No one did. The Vishari had destroyed all records of Kalori culture. They had forbidden the speaking of the old language. They had executed anyone caught teaching the old ways. The stranger smiled sadly. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small device that projected images into the air. Miraveth saw things she had never seen before. Cities of gleaming crystal that her ancestors had built. Forests of purple trees that had once covered her home world. Ships that sailed between the stars when her people had been free. We saved what we could, the stranger said. We have been collecting the memories of conquered peoples for many years. Songs, stories, histories, art, everything the Vishari tried to destroy. Who are you? Miraveth whispered. We are the Quiet Ones. We remember what others have been forced to forget. Are you Kalori? The stranger hesitated. I was born human, but I have spent many years among your people. I have learned your language, your customs, your ways of seeing the world. In some ways, I am as much Kalori as I am human. Human. Miraveth had heard whispers of this species, a small people on a single world at the edge of the galaxy. No threat to anyone. Certainly no threat to the Vishari Empire. Why? Miraveth asked. Why do you do this? Why risk yourselves for us? The stranger's eyes grew distant. Because we remember what it is like to be conquered. We remember what it is like to have our culture destroyed, our people enslaved. It has happened to us many times throughout our history. We nearly destroyed ourselves with our hatred and our wars. But you survived. We survived, the stranger said softly. And we learned. We learned that the only way to truly defeat evil is to remember it, to document it, to make sure future generations know what happened so they can prevent it from happening again. The stranger stood. I cannot stay long. If I am caught here, it will mean death for both of us. But I wanted you to know that you are not forgotten. Your people are not forgotten. And one day, when the time is right, everyone will remember. She moved toward the door, then paused. "There is a network," she said quietly. "People who resist. People who remember. If you want to join us, scratch a mark on the third support beam of the processing plant. Someone will find you." Then she was gone, vanishing into the night as silently as she had appeared. Miraveth sat in the darkness, her mind racing. She thought about the images she had seen, the crystal cities, the purple forests, the ships among the stars. Her people had been great once. They had been free. The next day, she scratched a mark on the third support beam. 3 weeks later, she vanished from the labor camp. The imperial records listed her as deceased, another slave who had succumbed to chemical poisoning. But Miraveth was very much alive. She was on a ship that did not appear on any sensor, traveling through dimensions the Vishari did not even know existed, receiving training that would transform her from a broken slave into something new. She was becoming one of the quiet ones. Similar stories were unfolding across the Empire. On every world where a conquered people suffered, human agents were making contact. They shared forgotten histories, taught forbidden languages, and built networks of resistance. They were not starting revolutions, not yet. They were doing something more important. They were restoring hope. The Vishari had always relied on despair to keep their subjects in line. Broken people did not rebel. People who believed they had no chance did not fight. For 12,000 years, the Empire had crushed hope wherever it appeared. But hope was returning, quietly, slowly, one person at a time. Meanwhile, the strange ships continued to appear. Some called them the Ghost Fleet, ships that came from nowhere and went nowhere. Ships that rescued the desperate and disappeared the condemned. Ships crewed by beings who spoke every language and knew secrets they should not know. High Executor Thivok was assigned to investigate the phenomenon. He was young and ambitious, eager to prove himself to the High Council. He gathered every report, analyzed every piece of data, and interviewed every witness. He spent 2 years trying to understand what was happening. In the end, he reached a conclusion that disturbed him deeply. The ghost ships were real. They used technology the Vishari did not understand, technology that allowed them to travel without using the Empire's control jump gates. They were operated by an organized force with agents throughout the Empire, and they were somehow connected to the quarantined world called Earth. Thivok presented his findings to the High Council. He expected alarm. He expected them to authorize an immediate military response. Instead, they laughed. "You expect us to believe," one council member said, "that a species confined to a single star system has somehow infiltrated our entire empire? That they are operating a secret fleet our sensors cannot detect? That they have agents on our worlds, in our cities, perhaps even in this very room? The evidence supports these conclusions," Thivok insisted. "The evidence supports nothing but your own paranoid imagination," another council member snapped. "The production problems on Keth Prime are the result of worker sabotage and incompetent management. The security leaks are the work of internal political rivals. The ghost ships are stories told by superstitious fools. And the disappearances? The resistance networks forming on every slave world. There have always been disappearances. There have always been resistance networks. These are the natural byproducts of managing an empire. They are not evidence of some vast human conspiracy." Thivok knew he was being dismissed. He also knew he was right. Something was happening in the empire, something the High Council refused to see. The signs were everywhere if one knew how to look. But he was young and powerless, and the council was old and unyielding. They had ruled for 12,000 years. They could not imagine their rule ever ending. Thivok left the council chamber and returned to his investigation. If they would not listen, he would gather more evidence. He would prove beyond any doubt that the humans were a threat. He would save the empire whether it wanted to be saved or not. He spent the next 5 years searching for proof. He tracked the ghost ships across dozens of star systems. He interrogated captured resistance members. He followed every lead, chased every rumor, analyzed every fragment of data. Slowly, he began to understand. The humans were not building an invasion fleet. They were not planning to conquer the empire through force of arms. They were doing something far more subtle and far more dangerous. They were building a bomb made of truth. Every crime the Empire had ever committed was being documented. Every atrocity was being recorded. Every victim was being remembered. The humans were assembling a complete history of 12,000 years of tyranny. And when that history was ready, they would share it with the galaxy. Tuvok understood what this meant. The Empire's power rested on lies and forgetting. Its subjects did not know the full extent of what had been done to them and their ancestors. They did not know they had been deliberately divided, deliberately kept ignorant, deliberately stripped of their histories and cultures. If they learned the truth, if they all learned it at once, the Empire would face uprisings on every world simultaneously. No fleet, no matter how powerful, could suppress rebellion across 900 worlds at the same time. Tuvok raced back to the High Council with his new findings. This time he would make them listen. This time he would make them understand. But when he arrived at the council chamber, he found it empty. The council members had been summoned to an emergency meeting elsewhere. Something had happened. Something important. A cold fear settled into his chest. He had spent years trying to warn the Empire of the coming danger. But perhaps he was already too late. Perhaps the humans were ready. In the darkness of space, far beyond any Vishari sensor, Admiral Yuan Sato stood on the bridge of the Remembrance and watched her fleet assemble. Ships emerged from fold space one by one, taking up positions in a formation that stretched across billions of kilometers. These ships had been built in secret over 6 decades. Their crews had trained for years, preparing for a mission many believed would never come. They were the Shadow Fleet, humanity's answer to 12,000 years of tyranny. All ships report ready, a tactical officer announced. Synchronized strike packages confirmed across all 900 systems. Yuan Sato looked at the display showing the Vishari Empire spread across the stars. 900 worlds, billions of enslaved beings, 12,000 years of cruelty and oppression. It ended today. Send the signal, she said quietly. Begin the awakening across the galaxy. Hidden transmitters activated on every world, every space station, every ship with a communication system. The same message began to broadcast. It was time for the Empire to remember. Admiral Yuan Sato had been born in the shadow of the Vishari threat. Her grandmother had been one of the diplomats who faced High Executor Kethro 60 years ago, one of the humans who had looked into the face of galactic tyranny and refused to blink. Her mother had been an engineer who helped design the first fold space drives that allowed humanity to travel without using the Empire's controlled jump gates. Her father had been an intelligence officer who spent 20 years living as a slave on a Vishari mining world, gathering information and building networks of resistance. The fight against the Empire was in her blood. She stood on the bridge of the Remembrance and watched the final preparations unfold. Around her, officers moved with quiet efficiency, each one knowing exactly what their role was in the coming operation. They had trained for this moment their entire lives. Many of them had lost family to the Vishari over the years, agents who had been discovered and executed, or who had simply disappeared into the vast darkness of Imperial space. Admiral, her communications officer said, we are receiving confirmation signals from all sectors. The Awakening Network is fully operational. Yuan Sato nodded. The Awakening Network was the culmination of 60 years of work, thousands of hidden transmitters placed on every major world in the Empire by human agents and their allies among the subjugated species. When activated, they would broadcast the truth to every being with a communication device. But the transmitters were only part of the plan. The truth alone would not be enough to bring down the Empire. The Vishari still had weapons, ships, and soldiers. They could crush any rebellion if given the chance. That was why the Shadow Fleet existed. Show me the tactical display, Yuan Sato commanded. The main screen shifted to show the entire Empire, 900 star systems connected by a web of jump gates. Red icons marked Vishari military installations. Blue icons showed the positions of Shadow Fleet ships. Green icons indicated the locations of Allied resistance cells. It had taken 60 years to put all the pieces in place. 60 years of patience, careful planning, and sacrifice. Thousands of human agents had given their lives for this moment. Millions across the Empire had risked everything to join the resistance. And now it was time. "Take us through the operation once more," Yuan Sato said. "I want every officer on this bridge to understand exactly what we are doing and why." Her tactical officer, Commander Chun, stepped forward. He was a third-generation military officer, his family having served in the Shadow Fleet since its founding. "The operation has 4 phases," he began. "Phase 1 is the awakening. At precisely 0600 Imperial Standard Time, the hidden transmitters will activate and begin broadcasting the truth to every world in the Empire. This broadcast will include documented evidence of every major atrocity committed by the Vishari over the past 12,000 years. Mass graves, slave camps, genocide, all of it." "The evidence is verified?" Yuan Sato asked, though she already knew the answer. "Every piece has been confirmed by multiple independent sources. We have sensor recordings, intercepted communications, testimony from survivors, and physical evidence gathered by our agents. The Vishari will not be able to deny any of it." "Continue." "Phase 2 is liberation. At 0603, exactly 3 minutes after the awakening broadcast begins, every slave collar in the Empire will deactivate simultaneously." This was perhaps the most ambitious part of the plan. The Vishari used electronic collars to control their slave populations, devices capable of delivering painful shocks, injecting sedatives, or even killing the wearer if they attempted to escape or disobey. They were the primary tool of imperial control. Human agents had spent decades studying this technology. They had identified the central systems that controlled the collars on each world and planted devices capable of overriding them at the right moment. When the signal was sent, billions would be freed from their electronic chains in an instant. "Phase 3 is the uprising," Commander Chun continued. "Our allied resistance cells will begin coordinated attacks on military and government installations across the Empire. These attacks are not intended to win the war by themselves. They are meant to create chaos, to overwhelm Imperial response systems, and prevent the Vishari from concentrating their forces against any single target." The display showed resistance cells scattered across every major world. Some had thousands of members. Others had only a handful. Together, they represented millions ready to fight for their freedom. "The Vishari military is powerful," Chun admitted. "They have more ships, more weapons, more soldiers than we can match in direct combat. But their strength is also their weakness. They are spread across 900 star systems. They cannot be strong everywhere at once." "And Phase 4? Yuan Sato prompted. "Phase 4 is protection. The Shadow Fleet will emerge from fold space at key locations across the Empire. Our primary mission is not to destroy the Vishari military, though we will engage when necessary. Our primary mission is to protect the uprising. We will position ourselves between Vishari extermination fleets and rebel populations. We will provide cover for civilian evacuations. We will prevent the mass bombardments the Vishari have used to crush rebellions in the past." Yuan Sato studied the display. The Shadow Fleet had over 1,000 ships, an impressive force by any standard. But the Vishari had tens of thousands. In a direct confrontation, humanity would lose. But this would not be a direct confrontation. "What about the jump gates?" she asked. "All Imperial jump gates will be disabled within the first hour of the operation. Our agents have planted devices that will overload their control systems. The Vishari will still be able to travel using conventional faster-than-light drives, but it will take days or weeks to reach destinations that once took minutes. And we can move anywhere instantly using fold space." "Exactly. We will have complete freedom of movement while the Vishari are limited to a fraction of their normal speed. They will not be able to coordinate an effective response." Yuan Sato allowed herself a small smile. This was the true brilliance of humanity's strategy. They had not tried to match the Vishari in strength. They had not built massive fleets or superweapons. Instead, they had identified the pressure points of the Empire and prepared to strike them all at once. "What are our casualty projections?" she asked. Commander Chun hesitated. This was the question no one wanted to answer. "We expect heavy losses, Admiral. The Vishari will not surrender easily. They will fight to protect their empire even as it crumbles around them. We project losses of between 30 and 50% of the Shadow Fleet within the first 24 hours. 30 to 50%. Half their ships. Tens of thousands of lives. And total casualties, including the uprisings across the empire? We cannot project with certainty. It depends on how fiercely the Vishari resist, how quickly their command structure collapses, and how many of their soldiers choose to surrender rather than fight. In the best-case scenario, tens of millions will die. In the worst case, hundreds of millions. The numbers hung in the air like a physical weight. Unsto had lived with these projections for years. She had made peace with them or tried to, but hearing them spoken aloud still hurt. "And if we do nothing," she asked quietly, "if we abandon this plan and return to Earth, then the Vishari Empire continues. More species are conquered. More worlds are stripped of their resources. More beings are born into slavery and die without ever knowing freedom. The toll of inaction is measured not in millions, but in billions spread across thousands of years." Unsto nodded slowly. This was the calculus that had driven humanity's decision. The cost of war was terrible, but the cost of peace, of allowing the empire to continue unchallenged, was far worse. "Admiral," her communications officer interrupted. "We are receiving a priority transmission from Earth. It is from the Secretary General." "Put it through." The screen shifted to show an elderly human man with white hair and tired eyes. Secretary General Marcus Webb had led Earth's government for 20 years, guiding humanity through the final preparations for this moment. "Admiral Yuan Sato," he said, "the United Earth Council has completed its final deliberations. By a vote of 47 to 3 with 2 abstentions, the Council has authorized the commencement of Operation Remembrance. You are hereby ordered to proceed." Yuan Sato felt her heart rate increase. This was it, the moment they had been working toward for 60 years. "Understood, Secretary General. We will proceed as planned." Webb nodded, but he did not immediately end the transmission. His tired eyes met hers through the screen. "Admiral, I want you to understand something. What we are doing today is not about revenge. It is not about proving that humanity is stronger than the Vishari. It is about justice. It is about giving voice to the voiceless, freedom to the enslaved, hope to the hopeless." "I understand, sir. I hope you do, because when this is over, when the Empire has fallen, we will face a choice. The galaxy will look to us for leadership. They will expect us to fill the void left by the Vishari. They will offer us their loyalty, their gratitude, their submission." Webb leaned closer to the camera. "We must refuse. We must not become what we sought to destroy. If we replace one empire with another, then all of this, all the sacrifice, all the death will have been for nothing. Do you understand?" "Yes, Secretary General. I understand." "Good. Then go. And may whatever gods there are watch over you and your people." The transmission ended. Yuan Sato stood in silence for a long moment, feeling the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. "Admiral," Commander Chun asked quietly, "your orders?" Yuan Sato took a deep breath. She thought of her grandmother, who had faced the Vishari with nothing but courage and words. She thought of her mother, who had worked herself to exhaustion building the technology that made this day possible. She thought of her father, who had died on a Vishari world, never knowing if his sacrifices would matter. She thought of the billions of beings suffering under the Empire at that very moment, the children being born into slavery, the families being torn apart, the cultures being erased, the histories being forgotten, the hope being crushed. "No more. All ships," she said, her voice steady and clear. "This is Admiral Yuan Sato. Operation Remembrance is authorized. Proceed to Phase 1 positions and await the awakening signal. Today, we remind the galaxy what it means to be free." Across the darkness of space, over 1,000 ships began to move. They slipped through dimensions the Vishari had never discovered, traveling instantly across distances that would take Imperial ships days or weeks to cross. They took up positions around every major world in the Empire, invisible and waiting. On Earth, in the Great Hall where humanity's government met, the final countdown began. Giant screens showed the time remaining until 0600 Imperial Standard Time. Citizens gathered in the streets, watching the numbers tick down, knowing that everything was about to change. In the slave camps of Keth Prime, human agents made their final preparations. They checked their hidden weapons, confirmed their communication links, and said silent goodbyes to the people they had come to love during their years of undercover work. In refugee settlements and detention centers across the Empire, resistance cells received their final instructions. Many of them had been waiting for years, hiding their true loyalties, waiting for the signal that would tell them it was time to act. And in the void between the stars, Admiral Yuan Sato watched the clock count down to 0. Phase 1 complete, Commander Chun announced. The awakening has begun. Across 900 worlds, hidden transmitters activated. Screens flickered and changed. Communication devices buzzed with incoming messages. A new signal cut through all the noise, reaching every being in the Empire simultaneously. The signal did not contain threats or demands. It did not call for violence or revenge. It simply told the truth. It showed images of mass graves on Vasher 7, where an entire species had been buried after refusing to submit. It showed recordings of slave auctions on pleasure worlds, where children were sold like livestock. It showed intercepted communications between high-ranking officials discussing the most efficient methods for breaking the spirits of conquered peoples. It showed the history the Empire had tried to erase, the cultures it had destroyed, the languages it had forbidden, the heroes it had executed for daring to resist. And it showed the faces of the victims. Billions of faces, each one named, each one remembered. Mothers and fathers, sons and daughters, teachers and artists, farmers and scientists. People who had lived and loved and dreamed, and who had been crushed by the Empire's endless hunger for power. The broadcast lasted for hours, but its effect was immediate. Across the Empire, beings who had been taught to accept their suffering as natural began to question everything they had been told. They saw the truth of what had been done to them and their ancestors. They felt something stirring in their hearts, something the Empire had tried to kill. They felt hope. And then, 3 minutes after the awakening began, every slave collar in the Empire deactivated. Billions of beings felt the weight lift from their necks. The constant fear of pain, punishment, or death at the push of a button suddenly vanished. For the first time in their lives, many of them knew what it felt like to be free. The uprising began on Keth Prime. Workers who had spent their lives in the forge factories picked up the tools of their trade and turned them into weapons. On the pleasure moons, servants who had been invisible to their masters revealed themselves as trained fighters. On 100 colony worlds, resistance cells emerged from hiding and began attacking military installations. And in the sky above every major world, the Shadow Fleet emerged from fold space. Human ships appeared where no ship should be, taking up positions that blocked the paths of Vishari extermination fleets. They did not fire first. They simply stood in the way, making it clear that any attempt to bombard civilian populations would have to go through them. Admiral Yuan Sato watched the chaos unfold on her tactical display. Across the Empire, the patterns of power that had held for 12,000 years were shattering. The Vishari were scrambling to respond, but they could not coordinate effectively. The jump gates were disabled. Their communications were jammed. They were blind and divided, unable to bring their overwhelming strength to bear against any single target. Admiral, Commander Chun reported, the Vishari High Council is attempting to flee. They are aboard the dreadnought Eternal Judgment, heading for the outer territories. Yuan Sato considered her options. The High Council was the heart of the Empire. If they escaped, they might be able to rally loyalist forces and continue the fight for years. But capturing or killing them was not humanity's role to play. Send the Council's coordinates to all freed species in their path, she ordered. Let them decide what to do with their former masters. Yes, Admiral. Yuan Sato turned back to the main display. The Empire was falling faster than anyone had predicted. The Vishari had built their power on fear and control, and now both were gone. Their subjects were no longer afraid. Their control systems no longer functioned. The structure that had held together for 12,000 years was collapsing in hours. But the battle was far from over. Vishari forces were still fighting across the galaxy. Shadow Fleet ships were taking heavy casualties, protecting civilian populations. The death toll was climbing toward the worst-case projections. Yuan Sato watched one of her ships, the Defiance, position itself between a Vishari battlecruiser and a civilian evacuation convoy. The Defiance was outgunned 10-1. It had no chance of winning, but it did not need to win, it only needed to buy time. The Vishari battlecruiser opened fire. The Defiance took hit after hit, its shields failing, its hull breaching. Escape pods launched as the ship began to break apart, but the evacuation convoy escaped. 10,000 freed slaves reached safety because the crew of the Defiance had been willing to die for strangers they had never met. "Status report," Yuan Sato said quietly. "We have lost 47 ships in the first hour, Admiral. Enemy losses are significantly higher, but their numerical superiority remains overwhelming." Yuan Sato nodded. The mathematics of war were cold and brutal. But mathematics were not the only factor. The Vishari were fighting to preserve their power. The humans and their allies were fighting for something else entirely. They were fighting to remember, and that made all the difference. The Vishari Empire died in 11 hours. Not with a great battle, not with a final stand, but with a cascading collapse that even the humans had not fully predicted. High Executor Rethvok stood on the bridge of his cruiser and watched his world end. He had spent years trying to warn the High Council about the human threat. He had gathered evidence, built models, predicted almost exactly what was happening now, and no one had listened. Now it was too late. His communication screens showed chaos across the Empire. On Keth Prime, Forge workers had seized control of the weapons factories and were turning the Empire's own guns against its soldiers. On the Pleasure Moons, the High Caste were being dragged from their mansions by servants they had abused for generations. On the Border Worlds, entire garrisons were surrendering to resistance forces rather than fight against impossible odds. And everywhere, the truth was broadcasting. The history the Empire had hidden for 12,000 years was playing on every screen, reaching every mind. Rethvok had heard some of his own soldiers weeping as they watched recordings of mass graves and slave auctions, atrocities that even loyal Vishari found impossible to justify. "High Executor," his communications officer said, voice trembling, "we have lost contact with Imperial Central Command. The High Council's ship is no longer responding to hails." Rethvok closed his eyes briefly. The Council had tried to flee, as he had known they would. Cowards to the end. They had built an empire on the suffering of others, and when that empire began to crumble, they thought only of saving themselves. "What about the regional commands?" he asked. "Most are either destroyed or have stopped responding. The few that remain report that their forces are either overwhelmed or refusing to fight." Refusing to fight. Rethvok had never imagined hearing those words. The Vishari military had always been absolutely loyal. Their soldiers had been raised from birth to serve the Empire without question. But the broadcast had changed everything. The soldiers were watching the same recordings as everyone else. They were learning that the empire they had sworn to protect had been built on lies and blood. Many of them had families among the subjugated species, relationships officially forbidden by imperial law, but widely known to exist. They were watching their loved ones celebrate their freedom and wondering why they should fight to put them back in chains. "Sir," the tactical officer reported, "we are detecting a large formation of vessels approaching our position. They appear to be civilian ships." "Civilian?" "Yes, sir. Cargo haulers, passenger transports, mining vessels, hundreds of them. They are being escorted by a small number of military ships that do not match any imperial design." Rethvok understood. These were freed slaves fleeing the chaos of the inner worlds, heading for the safety of the outer territories. The military escorts were human ships, the legendary Shadow Fleet he had spent years hunting. "They are requesting that we stand down and allow them to pass," the communications officer added. Rethvok looked at his tactical display. His cruiser was one of the most powerful warships in the Imperial fleet. It had weapons capable of destroying entire cities, and shields that could withstand the combined firepower of a dozen lesser vessels. The civilian convoy would be easy prey, but what would be the point? The Empire was dead. The High Council was gone. The systems that had maintained Vishari rule for 12,000 years were collapsing faster than anyone could respond. Even if he destroyed this convoy, even if he killed every freed slave and every human escort, it would change nothing. The rebellion would continue. The truth would keep broadcasting. The Empire would keep falling. And he would have added more innocent blood to an ocean that was already deep enough to drown in. "Stand down," the Earthvok ordered quietly. His bridge crew stared at him in shock. "Sir," the tactical officer said uncertainly. "I said stand down. Power down weapons and shields. Signal the convoy that they may pass unmolested." "But sir, they are enemies of the Empire." "There is no Empire," the Earthvok said. "Not anymore. There is only a dying dream and the choice of how we face its end. I choose not to add more atrocities to the list the humans are broadcasting." He turned to his crew, seeing confusion and fear in their eyes. They were young, most of them, raised on stories of Vishari greatness and imperial glory. They did not know how to exist in a galaxy where those stories were revealed as lies. "You all have a choice," the Earthvok told them. "You can fight and die for an empire that no longer exists, or you can stand down and have a chance to live in whatever comes next. I will not order you either way. This is a decision each of you must make for yourselves." For a long moment no one moved. Then one by one, the officers began powering down their stations. Weapons went offline. Shields collapsed. The cruiser drifted peacefully as the convoy of freed slaves passed close enough that the Earthvok could see faces in the viewports of the civilian ships. They were not looking at his cruiser with hatred or fear. They were barely looking at it at all. They were looking ahead, toward the unknown future, toward a freedom they had never expected to see. The Earthvok watched them pass and felt something strange in his heart. It took him a moment to identify the emotion. It was relief. Similar scenes were playing out across the Empire. Individual commanders making individual choices. Most of them choosing to stand down rather than fight for a cause that no longer made sense. The Vishari military was powerful, but it was not monolithic. It was made of individuals, and those individuals were watching the same broadcasts as everyone else. But not everyone chose peace. On the industrial world of Varnath, Governor Hismaler refused to surrender. He had ruled that world for 60 years, grown rich and powerful from the labor of its slave population. He was not going to give that up without a fight. When the slave collars deactivated and the workers began to revolt, Hismaler ordered his military garrison to open fire on the civilian population. When his soldiers hesitated, he personally executed 3 of them for cowardice and repeated the order. The massacre began at noon and continued for 2 hours. Thousands died in the streets, cut down by weapons they could not match. The workers had nothing but tools and desperation. The soldiers had energy weapons and armored vehicles. And then the human ships arrived. 3 vessels of the Shadow Fleet emerged from fold space directly above the capital city. They did not announce themselves. They did not issue warnings. They simply began systematically destroying every military vehicle and installation on the planet. The precision of their attack was terrifying. They did not miss. They did not hit civilian targets. Every shot landed exactly where it was intended, removing the tools of oppression while leaving everything else untouched. Within 30 minutes, Governor Hismaler's forces were reduced to soldiers with personal weapons facing a population that now outnumbered them 1,000 to 1. The soldiers surrendered. The governor tried to flee and was caught by a group of workers who had lost family in the massacre. What happened next was not pretty, but no one intervened. The human ships stayed in orbit for 3 days, providing protection while the workers organized a new government. They offered food, medicine, and technical assistance. They asked for nothing in return. When they finally left, the people of Varnath gathered in the streets and watched the ships disappear into the sky. Many of them were crying. They had never known such kindness existed in the universe. Meanwhile, the hunt for the High Council continued. The dreadnought Eternal Judgment had been the most powerful warship in the Vishari fleet. It had carried the most important beings in the Empire, protected by shields that could withstand a nuclear bombardment and weapons that could crack the crust of a planet. None of that mattered now. The ship had made it 3 light-years from Imperial Central before its engines failed. Human agents had planted a device in the engineering section months ago, one that activated when the ship tried to flee. The Eternal Judgment drifted helplessly in the void, its crew unable to repair damage they could not understand. The High Council spent their final hours sending distress signals that no one answered and making threats that no one took seriously. They offered wealth beyond imagining to anyone who would rescue them. They promised mercy to their enemies if they would only be allowed to live. The galaxy ignored them. On the 3rd day of their drift, a fleet appeared on their sensors. It was not a human fleet. It was a collection of ships from a dozen different species, vessels captured or built in secret over years of resistance. They were crewed by beings who had lost everything to the Empire. Parents who had watched their children taken, children who had grown up in slave camps, survivors of genocides the Empire had tried to hide. They did not come for revenge. They came for justice. The Kalori representatives spoke for them all. You have been judged by the people you oppressed. Your crimes are beyond counting. Your cruelty is beyond forgiveness. The sentence is death. The High Council begged. They screamed. They offered anything they could think of. The fleet opened fire. Within minutes, the most powerful beings in the galaxy were nothing but debris floating in the void. On the bridge of the Remembrance, Admiral Yuan Sato received the news. She felt no satisfaction. There was no joy in killing, even killing monsters. Only the grim necessity of ensuring they could never hurt anyone again. What is the current status? She asked. Organized resistance has collapsed in most sectors, Commander Chun reported. Approximately 70% of Vishari military forces have either surrendered or stopped fighting. The remaining 30% are scattered and uncoordinated. They pose no threat to the overall success of the operation. Casualties? Shadow Fleet losses stand at 42%. Civilian casualties across the Empire are estimated at 60 million, with numbers still climbing. 60 million dead. It was a number too large to truly understand. The mind could not grasp that scale. But Yuan Sato also knew the Empire had killed far more than that over 12,000 years. The slave camps alone had claimed billions. This one terrible day of violence was ending a system that would have claimed billions more if allowed to continue. What about civilian infrastructure? She asked. Food systems, medical facilities, transportation networks, largely intact. Our targeting priorities specifically avoided critical infrastructure. However, there will be significant disruption in the coming weeks as new governments form and supply chains are reorganized. Make sure our aid ships are ready. We will not let people starve because we removed their oppressors. Yes, Admiral. Yu and Sato looked at the tactical display. The red icons that had represented Vishari military installations were mostly gray now, indicating destroyed or surrendered forces. The blue icons of the Shadow Fleet were scattered across the galaxy, providing security and assistance wherever it was needed. Admiral, her communications officer called out. We are receiving a transmission from the surface of Vasher Prime. It is coming from the Imperial Palace. Yuan Sato raised an eyebrow. The palace should be in rebel hands by now. It is, Admiral. The transmission is from the rebel leaders. They are requesting to speak with you directly. Put them through. The screen shifted to show a group of beings of various species standing in what had once been the throne room of the Vishari Empire. Behind them, the golden throne that had symbolized 12,000 years of tyranny lay shattered on the floor. A female stepped forward to speak. She was old, her scales faded and scarred, but her eyes were bright with an emotion Yuan Sato had seen many times in the past few hours. Hope. Admiral Yuan Sato, the voice said. I am Karaz, speaking for the Alliance of Free Peoples. On behalf of all the species who have been liberated today, I want to thank you and your people for what you have done. We did not do this alone, Yuan Sato replied. The bravery of your resistance fighters, the sacrifices of your people, these things made today possible. We merely provided support. Karaz smiled, showing worn teeth. You are modest, but we know the truth. Without humanity, we would still be in chains. You gave us hope when we had none. You gave us weapons when we were defenseless. You gave us the truth when we had been fed nothing but lies. What are your plans now? Yuan Sato asked. That is what we wish to discuss with you. The Empire has fallen, but the galaxy remains. 900 worlds need leadership. Billions of beings need guidance. We were hoping humanity would help us build what comes next. Yuan Sato had been expecting this moment. She had been dreading it. The Alliance honors us with your trust, she said carefully. But humanity cannot lead the galaxy. We will not replace one empire with another. Karaz looked surprised. We are not asking you to rule us. We are asking you to guide us, to help us create governments, establish trade, and build the structures that will allow us to live in peace. We will help you, Yuan Sato assured her. We will provide advisors, technology, and resources. But the decisions must be yours. The governments must be yours. The future must belong to the peoples of the galaxy, not to humanity. Why? Karaz asked, clearly confused. You have proven yourselves worthy of leadership. You have the power to shape the galaxy as you wish. Why would you refuse? Yuan Sato thought of her grandmother facing the Vishari with nothing but courage. She thought of her father dying on a slave world so others might one day be free. She thought of 60 years of sacrifice that had made this day possible. Because power is not something to be hoarded, she said quietly. It is something to be shared. The Vishari taught us that lesson, though they did not intend to. They showed us what happens when one species believes it has the right to rule all others. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. We came to free the galaxy, not to own it. We came to restore what was taken, not to take more for ourselves. If we became the new masters, we would have failed. The chains would simply have new names. Karaz was silent for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. I think I understand. You are giving us something more valuable than leadership. You are giving us the chance to lead ourselves. Yes, it will be harder this way. You will make mistakes. There will be conflicts and struggles. But whatever you build will be truly yours. And that makes it worth more than anything we could have given you. The transmission ended. Yuan Sato stood alone on the bridge, looking at the stars. The Empire was dead. The galaxy was free. And humanity was choosing to step back into the shadows, to watch and wait, to help when asked but never to rule. It was the hardest choice they had ever made. It would have been so easy to accept the gratitude of the free peoples, to become the new center of galactic civilization, to build a human empire greater than anything the Vishari had ever achieved. But that was not who they were. That was not who they wanted to be. They had come to remember. They had come to remind the galaxy what it meant to be free. And now they would go home, leaving the galaxy to chart its own course among the stars. 1 year after the fall of the Vishari Empire, the galaxy gathered to remember. They came from 900 worlds, representatives of species that had been enslaved for millennia and species that had been conquered only recently. They came in ships of every size and design, filling the space around the world that had once been the heart of imperial power. The planet had been renamed Liberty, a symbol of the new era that was beginning. The ceremonies lasted 3 days. There were speeches from leaders of the Alliance of Free Peoples, testimonials from survivors of the Empire's worst atrocities, and moments of silence for the dead. The history the Vishari had tried to erase was spoken aloud for all to hear, and this time no one tried to silence it. On the final day, a human delegation arrived. They came in a small transport, nothing like the mighty warships of the Shadow Fleet. There were only 12 of them, led by a woman most of the galaxy had never seen, but all had heard of. Admiral Yuan Sato had become a legend in the years since the fall. Though she had done her best to avoid attention, she walked through the streets of the capital city, surrounded by crowds of beings who reached out to touch her as she passed. Children were lifted onto their parents' shoulders to see her. Veterans of the uprising saluted with whatever gesture their species used to show respect. Everywhere she looked, she saw gratitude and hope, and it made her uncomfortable. She had not come here to be celebrated. She had come to deliver a message, and then she would go home. The Great Assembly Hall had once been the meeting place of the Vishari High Council. The golden decorations had been removed and replaced by simple banners representing each of the freed species. The throne had been replaced by a circular table where representatives sat as equals. Yuan Sato was given a place at the table, though she had not asked for one. She sat quietly while the representatives discussed the business of building a new galactic order. There were arguments about trade agreements, disagreements about territorial boundaries, and debates about the structure of the new government they were creating. It was messy and chaotic, and sometimes frustrating. But it was also beautiful in its own way. These were people who had been told for generations that they could not govern themselves, that they needed masters to tell them what to do. Now they were proving that belief wrong, one difficult decision at a time. Finally, after hours of discussion, the Speaker of the Assembly turned to Yuan Sato. "Admiral," she said, "you have been patient with us. We know you have something to say. Please." The Assembly recognizes humanity's representative. Yuan Sato stood slowly. She looked around the table at the faces watching her. Kiori and Venth, Mizari and Thorax, dozens of species that had been enemies under the Empire and were now learning to be friends. "Thank you," she said. "I will try to be brief." She took a breath, gathering her thoughts. 1 year ago, the Shadow Fleet emerged from hiding and helped bring down the Vishari Empire. We did this because we believed that no species has the right to rule over others. We believed that the suffering of the galaxy had gone on long enough. We believed that everyone deserves to be free. The Assembly listened in silence. But we did not do it alone. The truth is, humanity could never have defeated the Vishari by ourselves. We are a small species from a single world. Our fleet was powerful, but the Empire had far more ships, far more soldiers, far more resources. She looked around the room. We succeeded because of you, because of the resistance fighters who risked their lives for years before we were ready to act, because of the slaves who remembered their histories when the Empire tried to make them forget, because of the survivors who refused to give up hope even when hope seemed impossible. She paused, letting her words sink in. When the Empire fell, many of you asked us to lead. You offered us your loyalty, your gratitude, your submission. We refused. Some of you were confused by this. You wondered why we would give up such power. The reason is simple. We had seen what power does to those who hold it too tightly. The Vishari were not always monsters. Once, thousands of years ago, they were a small species with simple dreams, not so different from any of you. But power changed them. It made them believe they were better than others, that they had the right to rule, that their comfort was worth more than the lives of billions. We would not let that happen to us. We would not let ourselves become the new Vishari. The Assembly stirred, some nodding, others looking thoughtful. Today, I bring a message from the United Earth Government. It is our final official communication with the Alliance of Free Peoples. She reached into her coat and pulled out a small device. When she activated it, words appeared in the air above the table, written in every language of the galaxy. "This is our promise to you," Yuan Sato said, reading aloud. "We came because we remember what it means to be small and afraid, to look up at the stars and see only threat. We remember the arrogance of those who demanded we kneel. We refused, not because we were strong, but because we believed no one should have to kneel. We do not want your gratitude. We do not want your tribute. We do not want your worlds or your worship or your submission. We want only one thing, that you remember this moment when you rebuild. Remember that strength can serve something other than cruelty. Remember that power can be surrendered as easily as it can be seized. If you build something better, we will be your friends. If you build another empire of chains, we will return. We remember everything. Choose wisely." Yuan Sato deactivated the device. The words faded from the air, but their meaning remained. "Humanity is going home," she said quietly. "The Shadow Fleet is being disbanded. Our agents are withdrawing from your worlds. We will no longer interfere in the affairs of the galaxy." The Assembly erupted in confused voices. Questions, protests, disbelief. "We are not abandoning you," Yuan Sato said, raising her hand for silence. "We will always be here, watching. If you need us, truly need us, we will come. But we will not come to rule. We will not come to lead. We will only come to help, and then we will leave again. She looked around the room one more time. The galaxy belongs to you now. All of you. What you do with it is your choice. Build empires or build democracies. Make war or make peace. Remember the past or try to forget it. These decisions are yours to make. But know this, we will be watching. We will be remembering. And if you ever forget what the Vishari taught us about the corruption of power, if you ever start to believe that some species are meant to rule and others are meant to serve, we will remind you. Not with threats, not with armies. We will remind you with the truth. We will show you what you have become, and we will let you decide if that is what you truly want to be. You and Sato sat down. The assembly was silent. After a long moment, Kiraz, the Vent representative who had spoken a year ago, rose from her seat. I think I understand now, she said slowly. You are not giving us freedom. You are giving us responsibility. The responsibility to build something worthy of the lives that were lost. Yes, you and Sato said simply. Kiraz nodded. Then we will try to be worthy of it. We will try to build something better. Not because we fear you will return, but because we do not want to become what we escaped. That is all we ask. The ceremony ended. Yuen Sato and her small delegation returned to their transport and departed Liberty without fanfare. The galaxy watched them go, uncertain whether to feel grateful or abandoned. In the years that followed, the Alliance of Free People struggled to build a new order. There were conflicts, as Sato had predicted. Old hatreds between species flared up. Disputes over resources and territory threatened to tear the Alliance apart. Several times it seemed like the galaxy would descend into chaos, but somehow it held together. When disputes arose, representatives gathered and talked, sometimes for days or weeks until a solution was found. When one species threatened another, their neighbors intervened, not with armies but with diplomacy. When leaders became corrupt, their people removed them. And slowly, imperfectly, a new civilization began to take shape, one that belonged to no single empire, no single species, and no single ruler.